Right, thank you and good evening. So I'm Giles Pritchard. I'm an RIBA accredited specialist conservation architect. I'm just going to give you a short introduction to who we are as a practice and some of the projects that we've been working on. And then I'm going to hand over to Ryan, who was the lead architect for the Newhaven Fort project. He's going to tell you all about Newhaven Fort. Just to wind back, after qualifying as an architect, I worked at Hampshire County Architects in Winchester. And over the years, I was there for 18 years. And over those years, I led the heritage team. And we worked mainly on cultural buildings, museums, and quite a lot of external clients beyond Hampshire County Council. And I was responsible for looking after Fort Nelson, which you can see here, which is up on Portsdown Hill, just to the north of Portsmouth, which is one of the Palmerston forts. And I was also lucky to lead this project. This is the Winchester Cathedral Learning Centre, located in the grounds of Winchester Cathedral, adjacent to a Grade 1 listed building and within a scheduled monument. So oak-framed learning centre. And then after 18 years at Hampshire, I decided to set up my own practice. We set up in Portsmouth Dockyard. We were in the oldest building in the dockyard. And we are now 14 members of staff. It's gone up since we set this presentation up. Myself as a specialist conservation architect, and we have two other accredited conservation architects, Ryan being one of them. And we still focus on cultural work, so local authorities, museums, charitable trusts. They're the sort of clients that we work for rather than developers or residential projects. And everything we do is all about heritage. It all has a heritage link. So just to talk about some of the projects. So this is Fort Rowner. As I'm sure you know, there are lots of forts around Portsmouth. So kind of plenty of work for us. So this is Fort Rowner, another one of the Palmerston forts. We were appointed by Gosport Borough Council through a funding scheme called One Public Estate to look at how you could bring Fort Rowner back into a viable use. So looking at it rather from a developer-led side, from a sort of architectural side. And we looked at the kind of the cost to bring it back into use, the extent of the repairs to be undertaken, including lots of waterproofing of casemates, and paying of that through residential construction within the parade ground. And it turns out, even if you fill the parade ground with sort of low-rise tower blocks, and you fill the car park, the site still doesn't make itself viable. So we kind of developed the proposal and looked at how you could bring the site back into use through a phased approach. So through some commercial use, some residential, through some community use. We then also worked on the Hillsey Lines. So the Hillsey Lines are the kind of northern defence of Portsmouth, a series of bastions along the top of the island. We were appointed by Portsmouth City Council to look at a condition survey, prepare a conservation management plan, and to look at a feasibility study for bringing the site back into use, particularly around Bastion 5, which you can see in the top left-hand drawing, which was a sort of landlocked site that has suffered from lots of vandalism and graffiti. We've also been working over on the Isle of Wight. This is Baldner Battery, 1938 coastal battery, constructed of concrete with concrete shelters over the top of the gun emplacement. We were appointed by Forestry England, again, to look at the condition of that site, to look at the feasibility of bringing it back into use and look at a number of options about finding a viable use for it, which is challenging. And then one of the early projects we completed when I set the practice up was Pritchard's Hard in Gosport. So Pritchard started in 1757 as an earthen rampart. You can just see this just to the left of these buildings, just through here, is the original earthen rampart built to defend Portsmouth Harbour. So facing out towards the left with the harbour on the right. Then in 1777, the site was established as an ordnance depot, believed to be the oldest ordnance depot in the world, was restricted to public access for nearly 200 years. Site eventually became vacant. Gosport Borough Council took it over, and then eventually Portsmouth Navy Base Property Trust took it over and looked to a project to bring back into use 7 of the listed buildings. So we worked on all 7 buildings. That included E-Magazine. So E-Magazine was built 1878, a gunpowder magazine which consisted behind that front facade of 2 brick-arched vaults into which gunpowder was stored. You can see on the bottom left-hand photo, that's inside one of the chambers. The timber structure is all about storing gunpowder and barrels. It's nothing to do with supporting the structure of the building. The building ultimately was covered over with a sort of concrete mix and then earth to protect it should there be a blast. And we did a project to bring that back into use. Sorry, just go back. As a brewery for what was then a local brewery company, who have now become very successful. We turned one chamber, which had been fire damaged, into their brewing area, and then the bottom left-hand photo, we turned that into their bar. Also, on that same site, we looked at the what was the mines and countermine store, built 1899. We put a big hole in the end, put some large doors in, and is now the home of the Coastal Forces Museum. Then also over at Gosport, we've been working on the gunboat sheds. So this is the gunboat yard built to house the gunboat fleet and found so invaluable during the Crimean War. This is a collection of grade 1, grade 2 star, grade 2, scheduled monument, conservation area, has the whole lot. We have, after a number of years and lots of conversations with Historic England, we have just got planning, listed building consent and scheduled monument consent to bring the site back into marine sector employment. So bringing the gunboat sheds back into storing and repairing boats, which is the kind of perfect use for gunboat sheds. And then also over in Gosport, we are working on what was the naval rum store. So originally built 1758, extended in 1830, altered again around 1897, 1898, and then bomb damaged during the Second World War. So what you see on that photograph is the ground and first floor of what was a grand 3-story building. You can just about see at the far end the remnants of the top floor. So this is funded by Levelling Up. We got planning and listed building consent for it last week. We are working with a contractor at the moment to hopefully get it on site early next year, which is all about restoring the building externally. So putting the top floor back on, but internally doing some significant alterations. It's less significant inside to bring it back into a mixture of marine related retail use and office space. So you can kind of see there's a section through the building, and also we're putting a rooftop bar on top. And then across the water in Portsmouth Dockyard, similar building, Storehouse 9, 1782, grade 1 listed. We're working with Portsmouth Historic Quarter Trust to bring this storehouse back into use. It's largely unused by the ground floor, and we're going to bring it back into use for retail associated with the dockyard, a new museum, and then office space on the upper floors for rent to get some income in for the trust. So as well as that kind of military architecture, we also do museum work. This is Jane Austen's house in Chawton, grade 1 listed. where we've done lots of work, but more recently we did a really large re-roofing project. And, you know, house is significant in terms of it's Jane Austen's house, it's grade 1. The contents are actually the most significant part of the building. So keeping water out and keeping public access was quite a challenge. Amberley Museum in West Sussex. This scheduled monument was the bagging shed. This had a railway line running into the building, where, in fact, it's one of Ryan's projects, carefully repaired the building and kind of revealed the historic fabric that was hidden behind a shipping container that had been put in there in the past. And then doing some kind of light touch interpretation in terms of putting this big graphic on the end to show how the trains used to go in and out of the shed. When we started the project, this had a kind of big timber clad end with some sort of nasty sort of 70s doors. And then we do things like this. This is LCT 7074, which is stands for Landing Craft Tank 7074, is the only surviving landing craft tank from D-Day, built to hold 10 tanks. Post D-Day had a sort of checkered history, ended up as a nightclub up in Liverpool, was eventually partly restored by a preservation trust in Birkenhead Dock, where it sank. It was initially funded by the lottery to salvage her, a project for the National Museum of the Royal Navy. And then we got involved in the second phase of the project, which was about designing a protective canopy to go over the top, along with some associated landscaping, which I think was a struggle for the structural engineer, because we wanted this kind of beautiful cantilever, which we ended up achieving, which was great. And then the ship was repaired in Portsmouth Dockyard, and early one morning was floated round to the seafront and then driven down on this kind of 96-wheeled transporter to the location of Under the Canopy. And then finally, we've been doing a lot of work for Historic England down at Fort Cumberland. This is the second fort at Fort Cumberland, 1785, so earlier than a Palmerston fort. We've been doing a series of projects. We've been involved with a recent condition survey of the fort, part of a master planning exercise, and also bringing some of the casemates back into use. So this was conversion of a casemate into use for the Historic England Emergency Planning Team, where we found kind of significant decay in the floor. You'll see on the right-hand photograph how the floorboards were fixed. So no nails in the floor for obvious reasons. Sparks on boots and the storage of gunpowder don't mix. So we carefully lifted floorboards, undertook repairs underneath the floorboards to patch in timber, and did some strengthening and partnering of floors before all of the boards went back in the original positions and the original pegs were used wherever we could. I say now converted into use for an emergency planning training centre, which Historic England run. So just a couple of photographs of that. So that's kind of quick counter through some of the projects that we've been involved in since setting up the practice. What I'm now going to do is hand over to Ryan to give you a kind of more detailed talk through Newhaven Fort. I don't know.
I'm sorry, the Spanish architect who migrated to Mexico after the Spanish Civil War, he designed and built a beautiful canopy for a racecourse grandstand at Zarzuela, which I think is just outside Madrid, entirely cantilever with that swelling of the intrados of the canopy towards the support, so you could get the moment in. Anyway, Unfortunately, it was destroyed during the Civil War. But there's some very beguiling photographs, and I wondered if you or your structural engineer was aware of them.
No, I wasn't. So for that project, our structural engineers were Man Williams, and there's a lot of so it's a steel structure with a cantilever. The canopy where it meets the columns goes up and down, and then the front goes up and down at a slightly different pitch. And the columns lean backwards, really more for sort of architectural aesthetics. So it doesn't feel like it's trying to fall over. And then there's quite a lot of concrete underneath the boat. So you can go underneath the landing craft for maintenance. So we had a kind of real careful coordination between concrete to support the structure, which was on a rhythm of the adjacent historic boundary wall, and then a ship which needed to be supported in certain locations. And inevitably those two things didn't always line up, which was a challenge. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you, Giles, for introducing those projects, and thank you everyone for coming to this talk this evening. I'm going to go through the Newhaven Fort project. So just starting with understanding the heritage and the history of the site. Newhaven Fort is built on the mouth of the River Ouse in Newhaven. It was constructed in 1871, and it holds considerable national importance as a heritage asset, having been used as a coastal defence for over 2 centuries. The fort, as we see it today, was designed by Sir John Charles Ardagh, who was a Royal Engineer who looks every bit the archetype of a British officer, comedically large, moustache and all. Newhaven was one of his first commissions, and he was just 22 at the time of his appointment. Newhaven was designed during the same period as the Palmerston forts in response to a perceived threat of invasion due to the rise of Napoleon III, who many feared would build upon the exploits of his uncle and finally achieve Napoleon Bonaparte's ambition of successfully invading Britain. Unfortunately, he came against the Prussians, and that never happened. Newhaven Fort is an embedded fortification sunk into the natural topography of the site and uses the mass of the cliffs that it's built on as its primary defence. The fort saw the first mass use of concrete within a military structure in the UK. Ardagh published a detailed description of the mixture and methods he used in the professional papers of the Corps of Royal Engineers. Ardagh's approach of using concrete proves significantly more cost-effective than traditional masonry by sourcing aggregate directly from the nearby beach and cement from some nearby pits just 10 kilometres away. They minimised transportation costs as well as material expenses, and the overall cost was roughly 1/3 the cost of using traditional masonry. To move the shingle up the cliffs to the fort, Ardagh's team engineered a lift system that ascended 37 metres up the cliff face, which you can see on the left-hand image there. The lift was constructed using scaffold poles, which were secured together to form a robust structure. And evidence of that structure still remains today, with pockets carved into the cliff face, showing where it was anchored. The photo on the right is the first photo taken within the fort and shows the parade ground and casemates. And there's just another lovely historic photo there of the original gun emplacement in action. These are just some of Ardagh's drawings, along with his fellow engineer Addison. This one shows the parade ground and casemates. I just think they're really lovely drawings, and they have just a really clear use of line weight and colour that is clearer in many ways than many architects and engineers' drawings you see today, I think. We've got an elevation here of the fort as seen from the east over the river, with a caponier in the foreground, then the white cliffs behind, and the gun emplacements running off into the background. This is a plan of one of the gun batteries with the magazines sunken into the earth in between the two batteries. And here's a section through one of the other magazines with the clear use of concrete and masonry in the structure. And finally, an elevation of the casemate frontages, which is really useful when we were looking at the project in understanding how the ventilation works, with the kind of ventilation ductwork coming up to that central chimney clearly shown. In the early 20th century, the gun emplacements were redesigned to suit modern artillery needs with fewer but much larger gun emplacements built into the cliff face. These were built in reinforced concrete this time. They were positioned over the previous battery with the existing magazines altered to service the gun emplacements from below. One of the first things we did when we started this project was just to overlay the historic plans with the modern drawings, just to see how those gun emplacements sat in relation to the historic and now lost emplacements. And then Newhaven played a role in both World War I and World War II. In World War I, it was a key defensive position within Sussex as the only defended fortification along the county. And in World War II, it was also garrisoned and underwent major changes, including the construction of pillboxes, a radar post, a battery command post, as well as the construction of various other small buildings and structures and canopies over the gun emplacements to protect from air raids. And this is just a slide showing some of those World War II structures highlighted in different colours to show the different uses. One of the ones that's particularly interesting is these two little purple dots in the cliff face, which are two pillboxes that were dug through from inside the fort out into the cliff face by a team of engineers from Canada. A couple of images of the fortification post-war. This is immediately post-war, and they show some of the changes that happened to the fort during wartime, including the enclosure of the casemate frontages. These were previously fully glazed, and the top of the arches were infilled in brickwork, again to protect from that strafing fire from the Luftwaffe. And you can also see on the lower image the gun emplacements, which would previously have been hidden, now seen with the World War II canopies built over the top, and even a small tower on top of one of the canopies, which was used by the lifeguards for many years afterwards. The fort was decommissioned in 1956 and quickly ran into dilapidation. In the 1960s and 70s, there were various failed ventures and schemes, including one to turn the fort into a caravan park. The developers attempted to demolish the fort and found that that's quite a challenging feat, and so they gave up, but not after causing really significant damage. That included removing most of the casemate frontages, removing the magazines that sat above the casemates, demolishing most of the World War II structures, and generally leaving the site to deteriorate. Fortunately, Newhaven Fort was listed as a scheduled monument in the 1980s. It was bought by the local authority and slowly turned into a heritage attraction and community asset, which has run to varying degrees of success ever since. A company called Wave Active took on the management of the site in 2015, and in collaboration with the local authority, put together the grant funds that allowed for this project to happen and the fort to be rejuvenated again. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our design approach to a project like this. One book that's been hugely influential on me as an architect is The Eyes of the Skin by Juhani Pallasmaa. In his thesis, Pallasmaa critiques the dominance of vision in how we experience architecture. He argues instead for a multi-sensory understanding of space, one that engages touch, sound, smell, even memory and time, claiming that true architectural meaning is rooted in embodied experience. Today, as I'm sure many of you know, we refer to this deeply personal encounter with place as phenomenology. His vision of multi-sensory architecture feels particularly resonant in historic military structures like Newhaven Fort. Its architectural language is simple, utilitarian, and purposeful, yet despite its visual austerity, the fort is brimming with a sense of place. We don't merely see it, we feel the warm textures of the brick, we hear the voices echo in the vaulted ceilings, we smell the cool, slightly damp air, and we sense almost visually the weight of history embedded in the walls. When I first came to Newhaven Fort, the post-war dereliction struck me as a tragedy, a story of decline and loss. But for the teenagers, by who all accounts frequently broke into the fort to do whatever it is that teenagers do at that age, the fort was something else entirely. It was a place of freedom and adventure, a secret world. For them, it wasn't a ruin, it was a playground. In fact, one of our design team was one of those teenagers back in the 80s. Their connection to the fort is not rooted in its formal history, but in personal memory, and is no less valid for that. This project, of course, is about making the fort safer, more accessible, and more sustainable. But it's just as important that we don't sanitize these sites in the process, that we don't overwrite its grit and complexity with a tidy narrative. Our aim is to unpick and reveal those layers of history, to leave them raw, exposed, and tangible, to allow people to read the building for themselves, not simply be told what to think about it. At the same time, we must acknowledge that the world has changed, and so must the fort. One of the key ambitions is to broaden the audience, to make the space for more people from more backgrounds to find their own connection here. Ultimately, our role as architects is not just to preserve the past, but to curate the present, to allow this remarkable site to tell its story, not as a museum piece, but as a living, breathing space. So, the project itself. The fort was awarded a £7.5 million grant from the Towns Fund in 2021, which was an early form of the Levelling Up funding. The aims of the project were very clear. It was to ensure the sustainability of the fort, to enhance the visitor experience and the accessibility, to develop the fort as a community asset, and to create jobs and boost tourism. Interestingly, conservation and urgent repair wasn't written into the grant fund, but it was seen as essential to a sustainable future for the fort to make sure that it was in good condition. The project approach, originally, the works were planned to be carried out over 2 winters when the fort would be closed anyway. But due to the site exposure and challenges of constructing over the winter, as well as the complex coordination of multiple contractors, it was brought into a single contract with a single main contractor for the base build works and then a single contractor for the exhibition works. And so the fort closed for a year to allow for the works to be carried out. We were appointed to the project following the grant award, so a little bit down the road from the initial proposals. Our first task was to map out all of the individual projects outlined in the funding bid, which you can see on the site plan there. We totted them up and there were over 30 mini projects in total for the money to be spread around. I'm just going to go through a few of the more interesting aspects of the project now, without boring you on all 30 of them. So first of all, we've got the north casemate frontage. This is the main frontage of casemates along the fort. There's 18 casemates in total, and these were used primarily as the barracks. The elevation was in quite poor condition. We identified the sorts of things you quite often see on these types of buildings. So cement mortar repointing, which was damaging soft brickwork, severe decay to the windows, which were actually 1980s replacements, as most of the casemates had been demolished, and so they were made out of inferior timber. Corroded rainwater goods, and an absolute plethora of redundant M&E littering up the elevation. And so the repair strategy was quite simple. It's to rake out and repoint the majority of the elevation, but not all of the elevation. Where we found good quality line pointing, we left it in place. Initially, we tried to remove existing mortar with manual means of removal, but that failed due to the hardness of the cement. And so we went with an alternative approach of using an Arbortech machine, which was approved by Historic England, just along the bed joints, and then chiseling out the perps. We then spent a lot of time with the contractor developing the correct mortar mix, using local sands, and in the end, an addition of a natural red ochre, which gives a slight pink hue to the mortar, which really works beautifully with the buff brickwork. Windows, the budget for the project didn't extend far enough to fully renovate the windows, so we prioritized the most urgent repairs, and when necessary, we fully replaced windows rather than carrying out isolated repairs as we usually would, as the windows weren't that significant, being 80s replacements. And finally, just trying to tidy up the M&E across the elevation as much as possible, which was really successful and made a big difference. Moving inside the casemates, they were having real damp issues in the casemates, and this is where they wanted to put the majority of their new exhibition, including AV equipment. And so it was important to make them, if not dry, less damp. And so first of all, we looked at the issues, and we identified that the original ventilation was blocked, and so they weren't well ventilated. The historic tanking layer had degraded and was causing water ingress, and modern acrylic paints were trapping moisture in the wool. And so the remedial measures we carried out was to install a tanking membrane in the terraplen above the casemates, about 450 mil down below the earth, to drain water to a new land drain system, which would go out the back of the fort. We then installed mechanical ventilation in the rear passageway, which runs behind all of these casemates, with just a couple of air bricks placed within each of the casemates so that you didn't see any of the modern mechanical ventilation itself within the casemates. And then we stripped back the modern paint layers in some of the spaces, but not all of them, to allow the walls to breathe. The reason we didn't carry it out in all the casemates is that some of them were still in use or had exhibition in which wasn't being changed. And so rather than strip that out and put it back in, we decided to just leave it. Overall, in the first kind of 6 months, this approach has been really successful. We put in humidity and temperature sensors, and they logged a continuous lowering of humidity for the first 8 months after they were installed. And then surprisingly, as our very hot spring and summer hit, the humidity started to spike again. We're still working out exactly why that is, but the leading theory is that being on the coast, the new ventilation system's pulling in a lot of hot, humid air, and that's condensating against the cold brickwork, which has a lot of moisture in it and condensating, and that's actually increasing the humidity rather than decreasing it. So we're just working on some strategies at the moment to reduce that. The site entrance was another one of the key projects that we looked at. The original combined gift shop and ticket office was discreetly located within a casemate and exited into a rear access tunnel. And its hidden location meant that visitors were not guided into the space, and it created confusion, leading to visitors inadvertently exploring the fort without getting a ticket, and also, crucially, without visiting the gift shop, which is obviously a vital revenue stream for any visitor attraction. There was a single door entrance into the casemate, and so it became very difficult to have this kind of two-way traffic through one very narrow door. And so we looked at various different options to make sure that the route in was obvious and kept to, as well as improving accessibility. The initial stage 2 design proposed removing a casemate frontage entirely and replacing it with a contemporary glazed facade to improve visibility and access. Historic England raised concerns about the proposal, describing it as potentially very harmful due to the loss of historic fabric and disruption to the visual rhythm of the casemate frontages. So upon our appointment, we reconsidered the approach to balance accessibility, visitor experience, and heritage preservation. We carried out a chronological assessment of the casemate frontages, exploring opportunities for change where the historic fabric had previously been removed during the 1960s dereliction of the site. The final solution was to relocate the gift shop and office into a more suitable casemate. Accessibility was enhanced through the installation of new ramps, steps, and balustrading, which guided people into the ticket office. And what we did is we removed the 2 existing windows either side of the casemate frontage, and adapted those into doorways, allowing clear direct access in and access out of the casemate. And we've just got an image there of the casemate frontages after those repairs, and with the second casemate frontage along there having been the one adapted with the windows taken out and the doors inserted, which I think is a really nice solution, which doesn't interrupt the rhythm of the casemates running up the parade ground. Another of the projects we looked at was the gun emplacement A canopy. So this is the World War II canopy built to protect from air raids. It was incredibly poor condition with spalling concrete and failing steel reinforcement. And there were concerns that the canopy was causing structural damage to the more historic emplacement below. The structural engineer was worried about the line loads of this structure, which was obviously built in a hurry and only intended really as a temporary structure. The canopy was also seen by many as an unsightly addition to the fort, which made it a little bit unfavourable amongst many people. And so once again, the initial stage 2 proposal was to remove the canopy in order to better maintain the historic emplacement and magazine below. Upon our appointment, we wrote a comprehensive heritage statement on the gun emplacement to help understand the significance of the canopy. The study found that the canopy had been in place for over half the life of the fort now, having been built in World War II. And that the gun emplacement below wasn't original, so why would we remove this canopy to retain it to that particular period of history? Furthermore, many of these types of World War II structure don't have the protection of being scheduled monuments and are being lost all over the country. And so the decision was to repair rather than demolish the canopy, which proved quite challenging at this stage because we only had the budget to demolish. So it was repairing on a shoestring budget. The repairs to the canopy included the removal of failed render along its entire length and the replacement of severely eroded blockwork, followed by the application of new render to match the original. Structural integrity was restored through crack stitching with stainless steel helical bars and the use of chem ties to repair the separating masonry skins of the blockwork. The corroded embedded steelwork in the canopy structure was exposed via hydrodemolition of the concrete soffit, with the exposed steelwork grip blasted and then coated with a protective paint. The soffit was then repaired using a polymer modified spray concrete, carefully colour matched to replicate the existing finish. So we've just got some photos there of the works in progress. So you can see the hydro demolition to the soffit, exposing the filler joists, as well as exposing the principal beam across the opening. We decided to retain the steel beam exposed so that it could be better maintained and monitored in the future. And there's a photo on the right there of the re-rendering, which appears very bright at the moment, but I'm assured will weather down over time. The next little project, which was really interesting, was the repair of the southwest counterscarp. This was part of Ardagh's original construction, and it includes a staircase that runs beneath the ditch to the outside of the fort and then back up, so that in the event of an invasion, they'd be able to fire from both sides of the ditch into it. It served as a barracks for air, sea and rescue and other personnel during World War II. And following the end of World War II, a chap called Fred Gale painted some murals down there depicting maritime scenes. Health and safety risks have made the counterscarp inaccessible for decades. So there are various challenges with getting down to the counterscarp. The staircase that gave access was a cantilevered stone staircase, and there was cracking at the cantilever springing point, so the staircase wasn't safe and needed urgent stabilisation. And then there were worries about the environmental condition down there. The ditch had been infilled with silt dredged out from the River Ouse when they built a marina and decided to fill up the ditch of their scheduled monument with silt. So there were real concerns about poor air quality. And so the structural engineers came up with various options to repair the staircase, including full replacement, masonry propping, and a freestanding steel frame. In the end, we developed a solution of installing steel stringers anchored into the masonry to help stabilize the staircase. Thankfully, when we got down there, air testing quality was good, and so we didn't need to do anything to improve the ventilation. The heritage approach generally has been one of minimal intervention, so we've not put any M&E down there. We've just got some contractor string lighting, and then there'll be guided tour visits with everyone having hard hats and a little lamp on, so you get a real sense of exploration as a visitor as you go through. And just a image there of the steelwork in place. The next project was the Parade Ground Playground. One of the central aims of the grant was to broaden the appeal of the fort to groups outside of those with specific military history interest. One of the key ways to broaden that appeal was a proposal to substantially improve the play facilities at the fort to bring in a younger audience. So there was an existing playground on the site, which is shown in these photos alongside a very ropey Romney hut. A company called Capco were appointed, who are specialists play designers and thoroughly good fun people. They produced some proposals for the site, which expanded the area to go up the embankments and make much more of a statement with the play area, and also to zone it into different areas for children of different ages and different accessibility needs. There was a strong desire to avoid a military theme for the playground, and so instead Capco themed the design on an imagined Victorian Open Day celebration at the fort, exploring Victorian engineering and innovation. This included features such as a replica of Ardagh's shingle lift, which you can see in the background here, and which was used as a climbing frame, as well as steam cranes, dirigibles, and tunnelling equipment. The visual impact of the playground was significant, and so a robust argument was needed to be made to Historic England for approval. we pulled out the evidence of previous structures dating from World War I and World War II at this end of the parade ground, which showed that historically there had been massing on this part of the site. The main case hinged around the benefits of securing a broader audience to improve visitor numbers, to secure a financially sustainable future for the fort. And so here are some images of the playground in place. Following extensive discussions with Historic England, the proposals were approved and the playground constructed. Footings were carefully positioned to avoid the foundations of those World War I and World War II structures, in coordination with the project archaeologist. And so far, the playground's been a huge success since opening. And then just to finish, I've got some photos of the various parts of the fort. So these are some of the tunnels, which visitors really love exploring. We really liked the idea of creating different qualities of light within the tunnels. So some are really brightly lit, so you can see the texture of the brickwork. Others are quite dimly lit, so you get more of an atmospheric feel, although the health and safety officer doesn't like that. And the top left image we have there is one of the historic ventilation shafts, which had completely broached and so needed to be reconstructed. We've then got the installation of exhibition within the casemates, which was designed to appeal once again to a broad audience. So some of the casemates have quite detailed military history, and others are set more towards educating children on really just getting them engaged with the outlines of the stories. And then some of the most exciting spaces are the ones that we've left in the raw without any interpretation or exhibition, just to be enjoyed as they are. And so we've got a couple of the magazines on the right-hand side there. The bottom image is a really interesting area in the fort where you see the 1905 gun emplacement butting up against Ardar's original fort, which is on the left-hand side there. And so you can really see the layers of history in that photo. So the project completed in February 2025, opening to the public shortly afterwards. Thankfully, the project's been really successful in achieving its aim of increasing visitor numbers. The fort has been having to turn away people at the door as the car park isn't big enough, which they weren't expecting at all. So in terms of that kind of broader appeal, it's been really successful. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan and Giles. That was absolutely brilliant. It's particularly nice to see some of the World War II concrete being repaired rather than just abandoned. We obviously see quite a lot of that through the door. I had one question about what the pillboxes in the cliff face. Can you still get into the pillboxes in the cliff face?
Unfortunately not. The tunnels behind have fallen in since. Okay. And so that is perhaps for the next round of grant funding.
Yeah. That would be a really exciting visitor attraction. Do we have any questions?
I was quite interested in the the waterproofing measures that you used over the casemates, which I think is this range here in the photo, isn't it? Yeah. When you lifted the surface, did you find a stable layer on which you could lay a waterproofing membrane, or did you have to create one, or did you use a membrane that could just be draped over what was there?
What we found was quite interesting. We had an idea of what we were going to find because we'd excavated, well, the ground had been excavated over the first two casemates in the past, and it had been photographed in quite some detail. And so we knew where we'd meet the top of the casemate bolts, and we had a rough idea of what was in between. The biggest challenge was deciding what depth to lay that membrane down to. We needed enough ground cover up above that vegetation would grow on it again and not dry out in the summer and die off. but we needed to not go so deep that we'd interrupt A, with the top of those casemate vaults and potentially damage them, and B, to be very careful around the archaeology which was on top of those casemates, which included, I think it's 4 traverse magazines. The membrane that was chosen was a very kind of rigid membrane that could traverse across both a very minimal build-up over the casemate vaults and the made ground in between. The biggest challenge overall was where you end that membrane.
Yes.
In some areas you're butting into a wall, and so that's fairly simple, although the flashing details are quite challenging. In other areas the ground just continues onwards, and so there's a bit of a challenge of how you stop water coming in from those directions. And in the end it's a mixed balance of doing the best you can and accepting that this isn't a basement tanking. It's not going to stop all the water coming in, but if it can stop the vast majority of water getting through, then along with the other strategies, it should make the casemates usable again.
No, I had a similar challenge in Clerkenwell. There's the buried basement story of a 19th century jail. And as in yours, the historic waterproofing membrane had just given up. It had been reused as a car park and various other things. And in the end, we took off all the surfacing down to the hard structure underneath. And again, we knew roughly what that was because the original drawings of the jail were proved quite accurate for the bits we knew about. There were a few surprises. And we laid a layer of concrete in order to provide a stable base for a waterproofing membrane. We only had about 250 millimeters covered over it, so we had to be a bit careful. And again, at the edge, we had some edges, we had nice things to flash against. Other ones, it's just earth beyond. Where do you stop? Well, I just took the view that we're going to install a ring of land drains around the edge and put that into the main drainage.
Yeah.
The jail had the similar benefit from yours. You've got that rear passageway, which I think you were using as a plenum extract.
Yeah.
So dampness coming through the ground outside, there's a good chance it'll get carried straight away. We had the similar. The basement story was behind a half vault and a retaining wall. So we used that as plenum extract, or it's going to be used as plenum extract, and just stop the water coming down beyond it. And like you, we found for 8 months it carried on drying out, and it's but I don't think they've had a spike this spring because they're not drawing air in. It's just getting whatever ventilation it can, and it's astonishing how dry the main brickwork has become. Really quite incredible. And then, sorry, going on a bit, but your canopies over the gun emplacement, did you put a waterproofing membrane over those?
No, we didn't. No, we looked at different solutions for that, including putting a various different waterproof membranes on the canopy roofs. Ultimately, they're very visible from other areas in the fort. The fort's built on a very steep slope, and so when you get to the top of the fort, you look down over those canopies, and we thought it would be too harmful to put a roof on top of them, and so we left them as they are, and they will slowly degrade again over time, but they've gone 80 years this time, and hopefully they'll last as long again until they need some work in the future.
Is there a problem of salt-laden spray getting up that high, or are you more or less above that zone?
I think almost certainly yes.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly exposed location.
Yeah.
The fort have huge difficulties with corrosion, particularly when it comes to modern metalwork, so balustrades, conduits, anything of that sort, light fittings, have to be replaced quite regularly. And
yeah, let's hear it for wrought and cast iron.
exactly that.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Actually, I was wondering about soil stability because obviously it's up in the cliff, and you mentioned the tunnels to the pillboxes have collapsed. Have the engineers done any testing on soil stability? Were there any signs of instability when the project started?
So along the cliff face itself, there's certainly a lot of instability. There was a landslide, I think about 15, 20 years ago, directly over or directly in front of gun emplacement A, the one where we carried out the repairs to the canopy. And then there was a further landslide about a month before we started works on site. In terms of the stability of the cliffs, that is a different department in Lewis District Council's problem. And so they're currently looking at cliff clipping to reduce the risk of land slippage. If they do that, then the site and the scheduled monument essentially shrinks backwards. And so all of the edge protection we have along there would need to move backwards. That would impact visitor routes. And so there's quite a lot of exploration to do there in the future.
Sweet.
I was interested to hear the problems you had with ventilation. Did I understand you correctly to say that on the passage at the rear, you were worried about that being a damp and humid area? You installed active ventilation, but actually thought that might be pulling more moisture in than and causing a problem. So you switched it off and are monitoring instead.
Yeah, so we have essentially a strategy of bringing ventilation in through the front of the casemates, simply through opening the doors and the historic air bricks and air passages, and then to help pull that air through, which originally would have been done by the chimney stacks and the heating pulling that air through. We installed mechanical ventilation in the rear corridor, which consisted of metal ductwork linking 3 casemates at a time to a single large fan unit. And then that would eventually come up through the rear ventilation passages. It has been working very well, but we have had this spike in the summer. What we've noted is that the areas that have less good ventilation, so some of these casemates are actually, the frontage of them is below ground as well, so they don't get as much air pull through. They suffer more from humidity than the ones that do have good ventilation. And so whilst we're still in the stage of fully developing what's caused that spike, and I'm sure it is at least somewhat related to pulling warm, humid air through, the base result is that more ventilation is good and less ventilation is bad. I know on a lot of historic buildings, they now close the doors in the summer because they don't want that warm air coming in. But here, that's not proven to be the case.
Thank you very much. That relates to a case I was involved in for English Heritage, the Spitalfields Charnel House, where the monument sits on a sort of raised island of natural ground, entirely surrounded by a very, very large double basement. And we thought, and the developers, M&D engineers thought that the basement would need air handling, because M&D engineers generally do, which was switched on at the scene on the surface of the monument. And so we agreed to switch it off and monitor. And it seemed that passive ventilation actually in that situation seemed less likely to pull moisture to the surface of the monument, but that monitoring was necessary. I think the great conclusion is that every place is different and you've just got to monitor and keep monitoring. But your case is a really interesting one, and compliments on a lovely project, by the way.
Thank you.
Just on the staircase, you call it a cantilever staircase, but obviously that's just a turn of phrase and it's not cantilevered. I was a little bit shocked at what the engineers ended up doing to the underside of that, because that's pretty unpleasant thing to do with what is usually a very graceful and clever structural solution to staircases. Was there, you couldn't persuade the structural engineer to come up with anything more appropriate? I can see you didn't, but was that a topic of debate?
We tried. We looked at a lot of options very closely with Historic England, actually. And there were just an awful lot of restrictions to that space.
Well, it was stone, the slabs of stone, are they?
Yeah,
fractured down the wall side.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so ultimately it was felt that the structure that was installed could be reversed in the future if someone came along with a huge bundle of money to take that cantilevered staircase apart and carry out a stonework repair rather than a steelwork repair. But given the limitations we had in being able to survey the staircase in the first place, it was a case of let's get something in that
could use it,
can support it and get people down.
And just a really simple question. You started off by saying that this is the first mass concrete fort in Britain, presumably not including what the Romans did, but we didn't see any mass concrete. I'm just wondering, is it the vaults of the casemates, or where is that mass concrete?
It is largely the ditch that's constructed with reinforced concrete walls. And where it's been infilled, most of that's been lost. There's also some revetments which are concrete. They've been later kind of rendered in a cement casing which has hidden it.
So you basically can't see that anymore.
No, you can see it in areas, and it's unfortunately in very poor condition, particularly in that ditch. Of course, where the grant funding was put towards a financially sustainable future for the fort, so it can self-maintain itself rather than a kind of pure conservation grant, the visitors don't really go in the ditch, and you don't sell any more tickets by going in the ditch, so the funding didn't go in that direction. When it comes to the conservation management plan and condition surveys, they look much more strongly at the retention of the historic mass poured concrete because it's so significant.
Did you do any tests on the concrete as to what it was made of, or are there any historic information on that?
So Ardar wrote in length about the composition of the concrete, so we have that record. We unfortunately didn't manage to do any surveying of it ourselves or any composition analysis within the scope of the project.
Yeah. Was it Portland cement he was using there?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank
you. The mass concrete you said was made with shingle raised from the beach.
Yes.
Did you wash the salt out?
Well, it's a very interesting point. There's no embedded metalwork in the concrete, so the salts don't have anything to corrode. But I don't think it would have survived as well as it had if the shingle didn't go through some kind of treatment before being laid. Because most of the damage that I was mentioning is really a result of weathering to the face, faulty copings, and water getting in behind, rather than issues with the concrete itself. So it's held up very well.
Yeah. I worked on a fort in Jamaica, which is right on the beach, and the hurricane waves go straight over the top of it, so it's got a hell of a lot of salt in it. But the unreinforced concrete is just fine. Things like your gun canopy are literally falling apart. And it's very difficult to find a way of bringing that back, given the kind of budget they have. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Are there any final questions?
Yes.
I think you said that Captain Ardar's original disposition of gun emplacements had been replaced and overlaid by fewer and larger gun points for much bigger pieces of coastal artillery, which would have replaced his probably breech loading or muzzle loading cannon, I suppose, on those swivels for the Second World War. Does any of Ardar's emplacement design survive? Do you think there's archaeology of it, or do you think it was all swept away by the later ones, which were probably less robustly constructed from what we've seen?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of the original emplacements were ripped out essentially for the new emplacements to be installed, although they're built above. They're obviously really monumental structures in the ground. The magazines below still survive, and I would be very surprised if there wasn't archaeology in between the existing emplacements of the originals, albeit buried quite deep below the ground where the whole cliff face was raised up for the new emplacements.
Difference would be that Ardar's work was constructed over several years massively and very thoroughly, whereas the Second World War alterations would have been carried out in a tearing hurry in much poorer materials and would be much more vulnerable. And it would be very surprising if they'd taken out any more of his work than they absolutely had to. I would have expected them to use it as footings wherever they could, because they were in a tearing hurry. I was involved in conservation, or actually not conservation, of blast pens at what were RAF Biggin Hill and RAF Kenley, and they've been thrown up in a matter of weeks. They were absolutely falling apart. And conservation, given the size of them and their condition, was really hardly really hardly an option, because the original construction had been so poor, although understandable in the circumstances. And you've done well to give yours new lease of life at all. But I didn't quite understand why you didn't want to give them a membrane above. I'd have thought that damp penetration could see the canopy off in another 50 years, wouldn't it?
Yes, it could. We just felt that the visual impact of a new roof would be too great, particularly with the design of the canopy the way it is. It doesn't extend beyond the wall, so it's very tightly nicked in. And there's no, beyond the preservation of the historic fabric itself, there's no need to make that canopy watertight. It's not protecting anything from the weather. And so we felt it was better to conserve the gun emplacement as it was, rather than to carry out improvements to it. But there is a lovely layering of history on those emplacements, where you go into Ardar's original magazines below ground level, and then walk up staircases through the 1905 emplacements, and you end up surrounded by the World War II constructions, and alongside that layering of history, you see the immensely well-built Ardar fortification, the perhaps slightly more hurried 1905 emplacement, and then the very hastily constructed World War II construction. And so it's a really interesting exploration.
Great. Thanks again for an excellent talk this evening. Our next evening lecture is on the 22nd of October, and it will be Peter Debney from Arup talking about the design of the Sydney Opera House 50 years on. That'll be an online talk only on Zoom. And then Hamish Harvey on the 10th of November talking about the Links Leader Bridge. Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.